Still, I don't understand clearly well. Critical. What does it mean, critical?
Critical is not accepting because somebody tells you so.
Critics?
Critical means not before you accept something, asking yourself a few critical questions. Where does this information come from? What kind of interest does this person have to provide me with this information? What information is not included in this information? What kind of scientific proof has been provided to support this information? Is this basically what interest does this person have to provide this information? Like TEPCO is providing historical data on earthquakes. Well, basically, should TEPCO be the party to do that, or should somebody else provide this information? Somebody who doesn't have any interest in having a nuclear power plant at that location. So that, I think, is very important to get a better understanding why you would say yes or no against building a nuclear power plant on that location. And if Japan would have had more critical thinkers, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Basically an extension of critical thinking. Less what, more why. Instead of learning facts, and that's basically that's not only for Japan but everywhere now. We live in an era where internet has so much information that you basically whatever you don't know you can find on the internet. The more important thing is that internet does not provide us with necessarily is the why. We can find all kinds of information about history, for example, about wars that have been fought, about dates, locations, who was involved, what happened. But the bigger question is why. Why did this occur? What were the reasons of this war to break out? What was actually the result of what caused this to happen? So, in education in Europe, I was very fortunate to have had very excellent history teachers. Our discussion was very about the what happened was less than 50% of the education.
What?
Less than 50% of the time in history, when we studied history, less than 50% was spent on learning what happened. What happened is important, but 50% of the time was spent on why did it happen? What were the reasons? What contributed to this war to occur, or for the Reformation to occur? What kind of social, individual, psychological, economical factors underlied made this change, made this war occur? Why? So we can study World War II, for example. Why did World War II occur? Or we can ask ourselves, we can study what happened in World War II. So we had this battle here, we had this battle there. This is how many people died. But then we can ask ourselves, okay, but why did it happen? Why? What kind of reasons? What kind of underlying factors are there for World War II to break out? So we have to look at World War I.
You said last man Popper. Popper's character is he just more try to get in detail fact, right?
Popper is basically saying that there is He's talking about the scientific method.
Scientific
and
method
sur-
to searching the real fact.
Right. Right.
Is it similar for this critical thinking?
It is. Well, basically, we can study all the facts that we want, and the facts is just that. It's data. It's data. You can find it in a library. You can find it in a database. It's interesting when we start to analyze this data and start to look for relationships to try to find and discover, okay, what made these things occur. Because if once we understand the dynamics, we can learn something about maybe other events that were completely unrelated, but they have certain elements, and we learn something about the importance of how to deal, for example, with war damages. One of the lessons that we learned from World War II is that the seed of World War II was basically led after World War One, when France and England made very high demands on Germany for reparation payments. By putting the blame on Germany, by putting them under a lot of economic strain, they basically planted the seed for World War II to occur. Now this, by asking yourself, why did World War II occur, we learn something about, okay, there's a lesson to be learned here about how to deal with a war. Nelson Mandela used this information to, after apartheid was abolished, by coming up with the truth commissions. Instead of because he realized that if we are going to scapegoat the white people, then this will lead to a civil war situation. So instead of doing that, they started to kind of absolve people and say, okay, well, it happened. It doesn't. Revenge is not going to resolve this. This happened in the past, but we need to acknowledge this. We need to bring people closer together instead of driving them further apart, because that will plant the seed of new conflict. So by asking yourself the why question, you can use history, you can and actually derive very important lessons from it. If you just focus on what, there is very little you can learn. History becomes kind of empty. It's just water under the bridge. These things happened, but it will not prepare us for anything that we are yet to encounter. So by studying history, by asking yourself the why question, you can actually gain wisdom from the experience that we had in the past. That's why I recommend in our educational system in Japan, to ask more why questions and less what. Okay. Next point. Put the student in the center, not the program.
You said the second one, less what, more why.
Yeah.
Is the same as critical thinking?
It's not so much critical thinking, it's more a different approach. Because we cannot say, by asking ourselves, why did World War II happen? We cannot say that is typically critical thinking. That is more, it's more a different question.
Could you give me another example of critical thinking? This is because I viewed many video, but still I don't understand well. And
Okay,
I think
another example.
not good example they showed us.
Another example. On the television, whenever there is news from Africa, we see there is hunger, there is conflict, there are people in concentration camps. If you look at the television, you would say, okay, Africa is a mess. It will never be okay. Basically, we can give up on that continent. Nothing is going to happen. A critical thinker would say, okay, but what I see on television, is that necessarily the reality, or is that just what's in the news? So a critical thinker would look at Africa and look at the economic statistics and would see, wait a minute, Africa has a demography that they have a lot of pent-up potential. Actually, if we look at Africa, if we look at the economics, if we look at the demography, if we look at their natural resources, it's very, very likely that especially the southern half of Africa will be the next booming zone in the world economy. So if you just look at the news and say, okay, well, I see this happen and yet another world war and yet another war, but the reality is it's completely different. What we see on television is not the truth. That's just an event that happened. And especially after visiting Africa, I realized that what we see on television is actually exists, but it's only a very small and tiny fragment of the reality of being in Africa.
Exactly.
So the reality is different, but it's very easy to misunderstand. If you don't think critically about what we see on the news, we might conclude that there is no hope for Africa.
For example, okay, Africa. Okay, let me try to explain that kind of information. Africa is South Africa and southern part of Africa, Lesotho or Botswana.
Right.
Very high percentage of the HIV.
Right.
Instead of Kenya, Tanzania.
Right.
But this is wrong. Kenya, Tanzania, they don't have statistics, accurate statistics.
Right.
Southern part Botswana, South Africa is high GDP per person. They try to get correct information. That's the reason high percentage of HIV.
Right.
But actually, the sub-Saharan area is very high percentage of HIV, but no statistics. So that reason, result is very low HIV percentage, but this is not true.
Right.
So critical thinking is kind of sort of thing.
Yeah. Right. If you look at the election results of
Zimbabwe,
98% supports Robert Mugabe, then we can be pretty sure that that is absolutely not true.
So you don't believe it?
We don't believe it.
Is this critical thinking?
That is critical thinking. So where does this news come from? Who has any interest in this news? The election results in
Is some more?
No, it's okay, thank you.
It's good.
Yeah, it's very good. I like it. It's very tasty. I was also hungry, I think. So, so critical thinking basically just means be critical of the information that they provide you with. Look at the source. Look at where does it come from. Look at how well this information is being supported. Look at if all the information that is relevant to this topic has actually been included in this topic. If we look at the 98% support rate of Robert Mugabe, now this is old information because he's no longer there, but if we look back in history, we see that there's a lot of opposition movement. So how likely is it that he has 98% support rate? There must be something wrong with that data. Impossible.
Exactly. Okay, I got it.
Okay, so the fifth point is put the student in the center and not the program. This is about Montessori. Actually, maybe you want to stop the recording in order to avoid crashing. It's almost 3 o'clock, so maybe you want to stop the recording.
Okay. No, actually, it's not less than 1 hour.
Oh, okay.